like to welcome you to today's session. Joyce Beatty is the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, and we join you with this very important session, Building Back Better, the future of Black businesses, wealth, and entrepreneurship. I believe small businesses are crucial to economic parity, especially among minorities. Small businesses create jobs and help boost the economy. 99% of businesses in America are small businesses, and nearly 50% of America work for one. That is why I chose to join the Small Business Committee when I first joined Congress 5 years ago. And I've stayed on the committee ever since. Small businesses are essential for our economy, and we need them going strong if we want our economy to recover. While entrepreneurship among Black Americans has been rising, it is still disproportionately low when compared to our white and Asian counterparts. In Philadelphia, 42% of the population is Black, yet only 2.5% of businesses in Philadelphia are Black-owned. A study showed that among comparative cities, Philadelphia has the lowest numbers of Black-owned firms in relation to Black residents. Nearly 13% of the population is Black, but only 9% of small businesses are Black-owned. This needs to change, and is why I've been using my position as a Small Business Committee to promote Black entrepreneurship, as well as increasing access to capital for Black entrepreneurs. The year has been a nightmare for many, especially people of color. During the last year, we have suffered a pandemic that has killed over 500,000 Americans, especially been killing Black Americans at a rate of 2.8 times rate of white Americans, and has had devastating effect. We will talk about this issue of Black entrepreneurship, the discussion. What I like to do is yield to a person who's been with me last year, and especially I look forward to hearing that. Joanne Williams, Chief Officer of Business Development and Minority Business Development Agency, U.S. Department of Commerce. Joanne?
Thanks, Congressman. Thank you very much. And it's an honor and privilege to be with you again this year. And thanks for all that you do on Capitol Hill to support minority-owned businesses and Black-owned businesses in particular. MBDA is pleased to again join you and the Congressional Black Caucus as you celebrate your 50th anniversary and as we engage in this meaningful discussion on the state of minority business, and again, more specifically, Black-owned businesses. The Minority Business Development Agency of the U.S. Department of Commerce is the only federal agency that is solely dedicated to the growth and global competitiveness of minority business enterprises. Our goal is centered on 3 pillars. We provide access to capital, access to contracts, and access to global market opportunities. I am proud to announce that most recently, MBDA launched its Office of Policy Analysis and Development, also referred to as OPAD. This office will be producing the needed evidence, data, research, and policy papers to make the economic case that minority business enterprise is a national imperative. One of our upcoming studies and reports will shine light on the economic impact of MBEs on the U.S. economy and our global competitiveness as a nation. I'm also proud to announce that we will be bringing back our state data sheets. Those sheets will provide a high-level economic outlook on what's going on by state with regard to important data that oftentimes is used when we talk about supply chains, both domestically and internationally, and the impact that minorities by state are having based on various industry sector clusters. MBDA invests in a nationwide network of business centers located throughout America. We also invest in advanced manufacturing centers, export centers, and a federal procurement center. The agency also has a portfolio of additional investments, including an Enterprising Women of Color program, entrepreneurship for the formerly incarcerated, equity multiplier and private equity, and a portfolio of American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian centers located throughout the U.S. Our programs offer customized business development and industry-focused services to provide access to comprehensive e-commerce. Very proud of a partnership that we have with Amazon to help U.S.-based minority firms with selling their products both domestically and internationally through Amazon Global Selling, and capacity building. I know that we will touch on that today. We facilitate access to capital, contracts, global markets. Importantly, we also help minority and Black-owned businesses with joint ventures and partnerships. We help MBEs establish and expand their global footprint. We have on the horizon, partnered through partnership with one of our sister agencies, the International Trade Administration, specific minority business trade missions. We also help them to expand their global footprint through B2B linkages for doing business in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Again, we will distribute data and policy analysis through our OPAD office. We're excited about that. We will create investment opportunities and cultivate partnerships for initiatives that will again help to change the paradigm and shift where minority business enterprises are today and helping them to build back better into the future. Again, Congressman, it is an honor to be here with you today. And I'd like to introduce our next panel member, who is a champion, advocate, and true supporter for many years for minority and specifically Black-owned businesses, Mr. Ron Busby, President and CEO of the U.S. Black Chambers of Commerce. Ron?
Thank you so much, Joanne, for the opportunity to be here with you this afternoon. Representative Evans, thank you again. Congratulations on 50 years of the Congressional Black Caucus of doing wonderful work. And we continue to look forward to the next 50 years. Again, my name is Ron Busby. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer for the United States Black Chamber, Inc. here, headquartered in Washington, D.C. We began in 2009, and one of our first initiatives was to make sure that the Minority Business Development Agency was codified. And if you look at our Black print from that time on, we have always said this has been one of our priorities. And so we are truly elated in the recent news of what is happening, not only on Capitol Hill, but across the country, as the Minority Business Development Agency is going to be the premier agency and organization there on Capitol Hill, supporting just not minority, but particularly Black-owned firms. Again, we represent 150 Black chambers across the country, located in 42 states, including Canada and 6 countries in Africa, with a membership base of over 385,000 Black-owned businesses. We were created in 2009 with 5 key pillars. Very similar to the Minority Business Development Agency, we understand the importance of making sure that we have a Black print that lays out our priorities and, more importantly, gives us accountability, metrics, as well as being able to track and trace our efforts. So our first pillar is really around policy, to create good policy that represents the needs and the concerns of Black-owned businesses. And so we're excited about the work that the Minority Business Development Agency is doing. Our second one is access to capital, and you'll hear us talk a great deal about that this afternoon, as we understand that the number one goal for all small businesses, number one challenge that all small businesses have is really around getting access to capital. But when you talk to Black businesses, it's their top 3 concern of being able to find affordable and available credit. And so the U.S. Black Chamber is not only working with agencies and organizations like the Small Business Administration through the Payroll Protection Plan, the EIDL loan program. And so for many of you, make sure you find out more about those programs. There's still $250 million left that's there set aside. And we're also looking at minority-owned institutions and, more importantly, Black-owned banks. Our third one is really around contracting. Many of us are very excited about the $1 trillion and up to trillions of dollars being discussed in reference to the infrastructure bill, we want to make sure that when the federal government goes and looks for Black-owned businesses, that we have available firms that have the resources and have the back office and made available to take advantage of those contract opportunities. But we also look at where corporate America is spending its money. We all heard that $6.6 billion of commitment that was made last year during 2020 of corporations saying that they were going to make sure that they give back and spend with Black firms. But when we have been having conversations with many of those corporations, they have said, yes, Ron, we'd love to do more business with Black firms, but we either can't find them or they don't have the size and the scale. And so the U.S. Black Chamber has created our own certification, and you can find out at byblack.us, byblack.us, to find out how you can certify your own Black business, or you can find how to support other Black-owned businesses to make sure that we continue to increase our own sustainability within our own community. And then next is around entrepreneurial training. Many of the businesses that you heard that went out of business last year between the months of February and April, 441,000 were forced to close. And the majority of them, 78%, said the reason that they were closed is because of lack of information. Much comes from Washington, D.C., but by the time it reaches many of our businesses, it's convoluted, it's complicated, and we make sure that our businesses have the information that they needed, when they need it, and more importantly, in the terms in which they can understand it and implement. And then lastly, it's around chamber development. We want to make sure that we're developing good chambers across the country so that those institutions can pass on those information, those contract opportunities, as well as establishing the resources and relationships that our business members need to be able to have sustainability. We're very excited about this conversation this afternoon. We're very excited about being here, and we're open to conversation and questions. And so with that, I'll turn the information back over to my good friend, Erica Miles, who will now continue with the dialogue. Again, thank you so much, Mr. Evans, as well as the rest of the panelists for being here.
Greetings, everyone. Ron, thank you for that kind handoff. You are a friend indeed, as well as are the members of the U.S. Black Chamber. And so glad to see you and all these other my esteemed colleagues on the panel. First, Congressman Evans, thank you for this very kind invitation. I've had the pleasure to work for multiple members of the Congressional Black Caucus in my career, including the late Congressman Elijah Cummings, and most past immediately, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who is the current chair of the House Committee on Financial Services, and of course, the current chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, the Honorable Joyce Beatty. My role was the Director of Diversity and Inclusion for the House Financial Services Committee, which was created by Chairwoman Waters as she ascended to her current perch, and duly so, to make sure that she could help create an intentional focus on diversity and inclusion across financial services. This whole conversation about access to capital, Congressman Evans, is so timely because, as you said in your comments, and as I know all of us agree, the pandemic only exacerbated challenges that were existing for minority-owned businesses, especially Black businesses with access to capital. And so the committee, even before the pandemic and then throughout the pandemic, played a role, and I was very pleased to help with that role. What I'm going to share today in my comments, though, is that I have a very unique perspective because although I was on Capitol Hill, I now have the pleasure to be an employee at one of the largest banks in the country, Wells Fargo, where I am a senior consultant and senior vice president working on the diverse segments representation and inclusion team. My specific role is to do external engagement, to build relationships with diverse organizations and communities, to help our institutions stay focused on the relationships that need to occur. You just mentioned that, Ron, that this relationship building is key. We can't say that we can't find them. We must bring people onto the team that can help us build those relationships such that we can do what's best for those communities. And I'm very proud to say that I've had a seat on both sides of the table. So my comments are going to be about what can Congress do and what's their role in helping minority-owned businesses, but also what is industry's role and what have I seen since I've joined Wells Fargo recently that Wells Fargo and others in industry might take heed and consider doing to create real opportunities for economic equality for Black and other diverse-owned businesses across the country. When I sat in the seat on Capitol Hill, I'm glad to say that it was me and my team that helped create that legislation that Joanne and Ron were bragging about to codify the Minority Business Development Agency. Came out of Chairwoman Waters' committee. Very proud to say that. Very glad to see it proceeding forward in the Senate and the House. Other things that we did when I was sitting in that post included creation of government programs that would create access to capital for minority banks, as well as community development financial institutions. For example, the Emergency Capital Investment Program at the Department of Treasury. Even in the Paycheck Protection Program known as the PPP, it was my former boss, Chairwoman Waters, and others, and I think even Chair Velasquez on your committee, Mr. Evans, that called for set-asides for CDFIs and MDIs because we had discovered that they were really doing the strongest job in reaching minority-owned businesses with those PPP loans. Many times, as Ron said, we either didn't have the right information as Black entrepreneurs, and or we were just at the end of the line when, for example, the first tranche went out. So I had the pleasure to work with staff on the committee as well as across the aisle to try to ensure that these set-asides reserved funds at the Treasury and in other programs to make sure minority and Black-owned businesses did not get left out. We also worked to help create opportunities for technical assistance because other programs that were created were the Small Business Credit Initiative Program, the SSBCI. Well, people need help filling out applications for those programs and what documents do they need. And so these are things that the MBDA can be helpful with, that the Chambers of Commerce can be helpful with, that other trades can pass on, as you said, Ron, the right information. Well, I'm proud to say that my work on Capitol Hill helped provide the format for that. And then I also heard my colleague Joanne mention about building the record, making the case. And so I even helped you with that before you knew it, Joanne, by helping Congresswoman Waters and Congresswoman Beatty hold hearings on these, because the congressional records can not only be used to make that case for the public, but they can even be brought up in it as to provide legal advice if these things are challenged in the courts. So all of those things are things that can happen in the congressional setting, Congressman Evans, to help this move forward. But industry has a role to play too. And what I think is so special about what Chairwoman Beatty, Chairwoman Waters and Chair Beatty did with the Subcommittee on Diversity and Inclusion was created accountability in industry. And what they asked me to do on their behalf was meet with these companies, including companies like the one I work for now, Wells Fargo, to find out what are they really doing, to talk with them, not in a gotcha moment, but to actually have real conversation about how to make real change. Let me share just a couple of things that I know for a fact Wells Fargo implemented during the pandemic that I think are good examples of things that industry can do. For instance, Wells Fargo made a decision to take its PPP profits, and they took those monies and put them in what they call an open for business fund. One of the first things that they did was provide grants to CDFIs because they too need capital to provide lending. And what's really special, of course, about community development financial institutions is they do leverage lending. So that $1 that you pour into them, they can turn around sometimes 10 to 15 times in the communities who need it the most. Wells Fargo has also been partnering specifically with minority-owned banks, Black banks specifically. Last year, it pledged $50 million in equity investments in Black banks. And of course, our CEO testified that that was complete as of May this year. Very excited that it wasn't just about equity. They also provided those same Black banks with, as appropriate, with access to technology, properties. There's all kinds of conversations going on to really partner with them to, again, help them create that economic equity, not only for their own institutions, but for the communities that they also serve. And then Wells Fargo has made so many commitments to organizations whose missions are focused on Black communities and on what they're doing to stand up people. Ron, I know the U.S. Chambers, we have that similar relationship and provided support. And Wells Fargo was a proud supporter of what the National Urban League did just last year in its groundbreaking building in Harlem, New York, where they are building a multi-use facility that will have businesses, affordable housing, et cetera, in our community, in a Black community, where Wells Fargo was a lead investor and is going to continue to partner with them as National Urban League spreads, like very similar to the Black Chambers and other affinity organizations, not just in Harlem, but across the United States. I'm very excited to be at Wells Fargo, very excited to be a part of the change that I always wanted to see when I was on Capitol Hill in industry. Very excited that I was able to see how congressional influence does move industry and how the needle really is shifting. And I'm very excited and hopeful that the MBDA will be a part of that. I hope that companies like Wells Fargo will continue to be intentional about strengthening their relationship with Black communities, Black leaders, and Black businesses, such that they can truly achieve economic parity. I'm very excited again that you extended this invitation to me, Congressman Evans, and I look forward to continuing the discussion.
I'd like to thank you for those comments. You mentioned a couple of names I want to add something to. Elijah Cummings, who's someone who I knew very well and was from the great city of Baltimore. I worked closely with him with the Oversight Committee, so he really. And then the great late Perrin Mitchell, who was the chairman of the chairman of small business, was in the forefront. And the fact that Congressman Mfume is the vice chair of the small business. So there's some chance. So this builds on the pattern with those three names I mentioned and Congressman Mfume, who's the current vice chair of the Small Business Committee. So I'm proud to work with him closely. And I knew Cummings, certainly knew Perrin Mitchell when he was chairman. I want to kind of put a question in, sort of Ron raised a little bit of it when he talked about codifying, because I emphasize the point of parity. And Ron or Ms. Hill, talk about what you think that codifying of the minority business development will mean.
I'll let Joanne go first and then I'll follow up.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you, Congressman, for that question. I feel that what codifying will mean for MBDA is the organization will now be able to expand its footprint, programs, and services. In the past, we've kind of been limited. I'll just say it plain. I'll put it in plain language. We've been very limited in the scope of services and reach that we can have to assist MBEs with really addressing this issue of parity. We will have additional resources that are needed. In the past, the agency has had, for all intents and purposes, the same business model up until recent years that it had had for nearly a half a century. And we've seen the growth and transformation of MBDA. I've been with the agency now for, I don't want to date myself, but just over 2 decades. And I've seen the evolution of MBDA. I've watched how, back in 2000, where we were then, fast forward to where we are today. And we're dealing with companies that are growing and busting at the seams, and they need help. And we still have a growing trend of those companies, Black-owned businesses at the forefront of what we're discussing now, as well as other minorities. They need assistance and services. And this codification is going to be a total transformation for minority business enterprises and the kind of services that MBDA will be able to bring, as well as the programs that we're going to be able to offer. In the past, we couldn't think about a conversation around, will MBDA have a program where they can do direct funding type initiatives? grant type initiatives, etc. With this new policy that's going to codify the agency, it's going to be life-changing for minority businesses. And I am extremely excited to be at the agency during this life cycle of where we are today and where we're postured to go into the future. I want to thank you for your support and looking forward to making you proud.
Congressman, I used to be a business owner, ran a small family business, grew it from 5 employees to over 1,500 employees. But many of the programs that were created during the 80s for minority-owned businesses are really set up for the businesses that are very, very small, the mom and or pop firms. And although we have 2.6 million of those firms, we still now have to talk about growing our own Black-owned businesses. And that needs technical assistance, it needs funding, and more importantly, it needs direct access for contract opportunities. And so when you look at agencies across the country, the Minority Business Development Agency is the only agency that even has the word minority built into the title. It was created for the support of minority-owned businesses. But let me venture to have a conversation that I think we need to have here. Because when minority programs are created, they're usually created with the idea that they're going to improve conditions for all businesses. Understand this, Black businesses have unique challenges. And when the broad brush of minority programs are created, many times Black-owned businesses are left out of that conversation. And unfortunately, it is many white women and white women firms that have been able to benefit from programs created for minority organizations and for minority companies. And so it is important to have folk like Joanne that sit in those seats, that understand our challenges, that understand the unique information that Black business owners need to be able to make sure that they're codified. Because we got to make sure that we codify not just the agency, but the businesses that they support, the businesses that are members of the U.S. Black Chamber, the businesses that are hiring Black people within those communities that many of us live in and work in and send our children to school in. And so it is not just about any one particular agency. This is about making America great. And when we make sure that our agencies are good, they in turn make sure that our organizations are good, which in turn make sure that our businesses are good. So this is really a rippling effect of moving our minority communities forward. And so in 2017, I had the opportunity to be awarded as the MBDA's Advocate of the Year, because I really believe in what their mission is. We have similar missions, and our mission, like theirs, is to move the minority agenda forward around an economic conversation where we all win. And so, Representative Evans, we're excited about what has been brought to the table, but more importantly, we got to make sure that it passes on both sides of the aisle. I think what we're seeing now is that both Republicans and Democrats understand when minority businesses, particularly Black-owned businesses, do well, America does well. And so that's why you're seeing the fact that both the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party are going to make sure that this gets past the finish line.
Erica, you have the luxury of being now in the private sector, and at one time you were, as you said, a up and coming person on Maxine Waters' committee and been around business. The American Rescue Plan provides $50 billion to help small businesses. It provides $15 billion for targeted idle grants, $28.6 billion for restaurant funds, and an additional $1.25 billion for the shuttle vendor program, and $175 million for community navigators. Now, you, with your uniqueness of sitting where you sit now, and knowing what you know from a historical perspective, and the anniversary of the Congressional Black Caucus, 50 years, and Joyce Beatty, who sits on the Finance Committee and was subcommittee chair on diversity. With all of this, and there's a lot of mix. You heard Ron.
A lot of mix.
A lot of mix. take all that I'm trying to tell you where we're meeting a moment, just in the middle of a pandemic. Vice President Harris, first African-American woman to be in such a great position in the forefront. You've seen all these things coming, and I heard some of your comments. Where do you think we are with aspect of building back better and parity? I mean, I know I threw a lot at you, but just talk to us a little bit and where you think we are. What moment can we say to Black businesses around? What can we say to the Black business community in the nation just right now with all of these pieces? Now, I want to tell you, you talk about where you are and talk about where you were, and you have both. You said private and public. So help qualify a little bit. Why do you think about us addressing this opportunity?
Congressman Evans, I can't wait till I can get to Philadelphia and keep talking to you again. I hope you don't let this be the only time we talk, because I think we're going to have a great conversation when we continue this. First of all, let me put in a shameless plug for, you mentioned Vice President Harris. My soror also believe that our other panelists, Ms. Hill is a member of the esteemed sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Just thought I'd put that shameless plug in there. This is a CBC event, so I think that's appropriate. Then I also want to say, I really appreciate, Congressman, the way you acknowledged my appreciation for history. Because what you also may not know about me is I'm from Tennessee. I'm a Southern girl, and my grandfather and my grandparents, they lived in a little dot town called Humboldt, Tennessee. And in that town, my grandfather was the first Black elected official. He was an alderman. And I remember as a little girl going with him to the NAACP meetings. They would meet at the funeral home. Sometimes there would even be a body in there, Congressman. But they meet the chapel, and it would be the business people, the hairstylists, the principals of the school, the deacons from the church, all of the Black leaders, et cetera. And they would talk about, well, who can we put up for this position and who can we put up for that? Because like Ron mentioned, well, other people might not know who's eligible, but certainly we knew plenty of eligible Black candidates for opportunities. And my grandfather, Congressman, was almost single-handedly responsible for integrating the municipal services in Humboldt. Under his watch, the first Black firefighter, police officer, even someone to work in the utility company was appointed because of his speaking up about it. So he would be so proud that I picked up the mantle and continued with diversity and inclusion and calling out why we can't be at the table. That being said, he and my grandmother would be proud that there is a Black woman that's been elected to one of the highest positions in the land. They would be proud to see that there's a permanent place in the federal government, my granddaddy would say, the federal government, where somebody's going to pay attention to minority and Black-owned businesses. But if I could speak to the moment, the one thing that industry and government need to do, Congressman, is do this effort with intentionality. If they don't remember anything else that I would say today, is that this must be done with intentionality. We can't, and accountability. You cannot allow even the elected people, you can't allow industry, you can't let anyone off the hook in this process. Everyone has to do what they said they were going to do. And then they have to do it all the time. It has to become a part of the culture. What I love about what I see in my current company on the private sector side, Congressman Evans, is that I told you and mentioned earlier that diversity and inclusion is in every single business line now at Wells Fargo. Whether you're talking about commercial lending, whether you're talking about mortgage lending, whether you're talking about commercial banking, investment banking, asset management, everyone has to have a conversation about who they're doing business with and whether or not the products and services that they are providing are effective and useful for all communities, including communities of color, especially Black communities. This is the season. So I would say that we are in a moment, Congressman, that is historic, and I feel good in this moment, but the work is not done. So my relationships with people on Capitol Hill, like yourself, because we're going to have that meeting in Philadelphia, sir. And people like my former bosses and people like Ron and Joanne, we have to keep working together on this effort. And we must do it with strong intentionality. And then hopefully people on Capitol Hill and even the individual institutions will hold themselves accountable for the promises that they made so we can see continued progress.
Your comments were great. And since you mentioned, I want to deviate a little on intentionality. As we have this conversation, I want to make sure that Jesse Jackson that we mentioned, and hope he and his wife are feeling healthy, because certainly the Congressional Black Caucus have very proudly depended a great time upon with Jesse Jackson when he had the Black Wall Street movement, and hope that he and his wife feel better, because Jesse Jackson very, very distinctly, I remember, with the Black Wall Street project. So would Joanne or Ron like to speak a little bit, since we're talking about that, and want to send our prayers to Jesse Jackson and to his wife, and hoping that they feel better and get better. So Joanne and Ron, the Black Wall Street project would fit nicely in this whole discussion, and we talk about from a historical perspective.
I had the opportunity to travel with Reverend Jackson for about 2 years as we really looked at partnering together with his organization. And I had a chance to speak at the Wall Street Project at the last time we were all together. And it was really ironic because I was on a stage with Reverend Sharpton and Mark Mariel and all of the national icons from our community. And the moderator had this comment about white people's ice. And those of us that are old enough to remember, there used to be this myth that white folk ice was colder than Black people. We used to say, man, white folk got everything better than we do. Even their ice is colder than ours. And I told Reverend Jackson this story while I was on the panel, because you see, like Miss Miles, I had a grandfather who grew up in a small town in Temple, Texas. And before we had refrigerators, we used to have ice boxes. And if you remember, you used to get a block of ice delivered to you, and it would put it in your ice box, and it would keep your meats and fruits and vegetables fresh for 7 days. Well, as a youngster, my grandfather allowed me to ride with him one Saturday morning to deliver ice. And so you put your ice on the back of his truck, and we would go to our white community first and deliver their ice and put it in their ice boxes. Representative Evans, when I first got to Washington, D.C., I had the chance to go to the Frederick Douglass House and actually saw an ice box in there. So for those of you that are listening, if you ever get a chance, go visit that. Reverend Jackson is honored there as well. So we would get to our white clients first thing Saturday morning, you put that block of ice there and it'd stay fresh for 7 days. Well, by the time we got to the Black community, that ice had sat on the back of that truck all afternoon. And so it would have melted down a little bit and got chipped away a little bit. But so by the time it got into our ice boxes, it literally only lasted 5.5 days. So you see, there was some truth to the myth that white folk ice was colder than ours. But because of a Black man, we created and mass produced the ice maker now. So ain't nobody's ice colder than our ice. Matter of fact, I can get crushed ice, cubed ice, filtered ice, flavored ice. I can get colored ice if I want to. And when we see our communities in the same way, we don't have to worry about what's going on in someone else's community. We have the intellectual property, the intellectual capacity to be able to create the next new refrigeration system and ice maker. And so I tell my community, my business owners, as well as our organization, I'm not concerned about what else is going on with white folk. I need to concentrate on our businesses, our universities, our organizations. And when we see ourselves in that same vein, that's when America will truly be at the epitome of what it created out to be, and that is a great nation. And when we do that, we'll all succeed. And so I'm really excited. I love Reverend Jackson and what he has done. And what we're talking about is really about a scorecard. And look back at his organization, he held corporate America accountable. The one thing that he did that we all know is he bought some stock in an organization, which allowed him to show up at a shareholders meeting, which allowed him to go ask the questions that the rest of us wanted to know. And so we have asked organizations like American Express, like Wells Fargo, you know what? As opposed to giving us that traditional check and funding, give us shares of your stock. Let me now go in and say, let me advocate for my members. Let me sit at the table and really have a voice. I learned that from Reverend Jackson, and we will continue to bring his voice to not just corporate America, but to Black Americans across the country.
And Ron, I could not agree more. I could not agree more. I have to just echo everything that you shared about Reverend Jackson, and I do hope that he and his wife are coming along nicely. I did see the situation there, but he's a homeboy for me, a native of South Carolina, and so am I, born and raised. And so, speaking of being from the South, Erica, yeah, I have a family of entrepreneurs that are there that are doing some amazing work. MBDA honored Reverend Jackson back in the 1990s, and I agree. He was really one of the first figures to really begin the economic dialogue following on the heels of Dr. Martin Luther King. When you talk about economic empowerment for African-American owned businesses, he was really the champion at the forefront of that. And, you know, down South, we would say, you know, you want to take up a love offering. It wasn't about a love offering for him. You know, it was about the economic case for why we needed to have accountability and really shining light on the importance of making certain that diversity and inclusion, way back then, he was laying the foundation for this whole conversation that's built up to where we are today. When we talk about economic empowerment, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, he really was at the forefront championing and advocating for that. And again, it was about the business case. It wasn't about, we need to do this because we need to break off something to do the right thing. You know, fast forward to where we are today, and you look at our posture as a nation in this global economy, he was really helping us a long time ago to see where we needed to get to have this anchored in totality in all the business of America. And so we owe a lot of debt and gratitude to Reverend Jackson for the work that he has done to lay the foundation for where we are today with this whole Black Wall Street movement and mobilization that he put in place. He was truly and is truly a visionary for what we're dealing with today. And we owe a lot of debt and gratitude to him. I also would like to acknowledge that, you know, he's always been a huge proponent and champion for historically Black colleges and universities. He's always pulled them into the conversation strategically of all things that he's talked about with regard to the economic imperative. Why? Because we have some of America's brightest, most intelligent minds that have come from HBCUs that are sitting in those boardrooms and that are making up the executive cohort of C-suite executives across America today that we know. So, and I think that again, those are key pillars, key attributes that he has made. And the last point that I would make, I was just last week, I should share Ron and Erica and Congressman. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office does an annual InventionCon conference, right? I served at that conference and they talked about all these inventions, patents and trademarks, et cetera, that African Americans have, that they've done in partnership with our national laboratories, Argonne, Sandia, the Federal Labs Consortium, et cetera, and all of what's going on with the future of business, because that's what we're talking about, business. We must know that we have some incredible African Americans out here that are capable, and I expect to see the next one be the Jeff Bezos of the future. Speaking of ice being colder, I'm looking forward to that. And I think it's going to be, we're going to get to see it. Just like we never thought we'd see, people that are sitting where they sit now in Washington, D.C. I think that we're going to see the same thing from the business side of things, continue to build over time and in the coming decade.
Congressman, I know you did
Erica,
to me, but do you mind if I just say one?
Yes, I want you to get
the Reverend, just one little
Erica,
tidbit.
you got 10 minutes. You can let
I only
loose.
want to say one thing, and then I promise I'll
Take your
give
time.
like
Take
that.
your time, Erica.
He's just too good for me not to say one thing. I'm praying for health and strength for them on this side. So I'm hoping that they recover quickly and fully. But I just wanted to tie in one other comment, and I want to associate myself with everything that my esteemed panelists said. But he also spoke up for minority-owned businesses to have opportunities for contracts and other business endeavors. Just one example I'll mention, I briefly lived in Chicago, and I remember all of the debate that was going on over the Soldier Field renovation. It was Reverend Jackson who stepped up and said, how many Black contractors do you all have on this project? And he's done that in that case and plenty of other times to make sure that do we at least make the list? And then not only are we on the list, but do we actually get selected for these opportunities? And he really just came in and just would shine a light. And I think that's what all of us are doing in our roles, Congressman Everett. We're shining a light, and I hope that he will continue to be able to be that beacon for us. Thank you for letting me jump in.
Erica, let me say something to you, Joanne and Ron. It is meeting the moment. And what better moment than you can talk about Reverend Jackson, the Black Wall Street Project, what he meant, still means today in his leadership. It is his leadership that he has taken consistently. So I wanted to raise that, like some people, talked about Elijah Cummings and Parham Mitchell, and all of those people, and Thume, all of those came about Reverend Jackson laying that groundwork. So I share with you in this period, for all three of you at this moment, about that economic parity we started off. We still got a long way to go, but we have to stay intentional. I love that phrase that you said, Erica, intentional, intentional. And this conversation is intentional, having all of you in there. Each of you got about 2 minutes to close out, because I want to make sure that they bugging me on time. But I like to get two closing, and I think that do. I start with you, Erica, and then we go down the line and close out.
Well, again, I want to thank you, Congressman Evans. I have enjoyed myself with you and with these panelists. They are esteemed indeed, as are you. And I want to thank you for your good work. I want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus and all of the members of that caucus who keep Congress focused on these issues. I can't reiterate enough the importance of, I think, the relationship building that has to continue. I'm so glad that I get to do this for a living full time, Congressman Evans, but I have to tell you, it's a continuation of what I was already doing on Capitol Hill. It's what Chairwoman Waters and Chair Beatty said has to happen. We have to have these, they call them candid conversations in industry, but they're kind of tough because people don't always want to acknowledge that there are disparities. They don't want to always. So now we have a whole select committee on that, looking at economic disparities in the Congress, and a whole subcommittee on diversity and inclusion. These things didn't exist until now. And unfortunately, sometimes these things emerge in a crisis. And our current crisis is this pandemic. The long-going crisis has been systemic racism and the impacts that it has brought to the Black community and communities of color in general. And I'm very much looking forward to the continued work that I've been asked to do at Wells Fargo to intentionally help them build relationships. I'm looking forward to the continued success of Chairwoman Waters, Chair Beatty, of you, Congressman Evans, and all the good things that so many members of the CBC do across the country to not only speak just for the Black people in their community, but for their communities in general, that they all be lifted. So I thank you again for this invitation, and I'll hand off to Joanne.
Thank you, Erica. And Congressman, again, it is an absolute honor and privilege to be with you again this year. Thank you again for all that you do for MBDA, have done, and for our friends there in Philadelphia at the Enterprise Center. I could not go through this presentation without acknowledging that, and all of your support that comes from other congressional representatives within the Congressional Black Caucus. What I'd like to thank you, Erica, and thank you, Ron. I would like to also just leave you with minority business enterprise today is a national imperative. I feel that this pandemic has been a wake-up call to America in a good sense, because what it has done is shine light on the opportunity that we have to correct things that have not been where they need to be. And again, not because it's something we need to do because it's a love offering. It's about the economic case today and our competitiveness as a nation. We've done it better than anybody in the world. African Americans, when you look at the value that we bring to this nation, the linkages that we have to the continent of Africa and across the globe with minorities in general, is a competitive advantage that we have as a nation. I would ask that we continue to be intentional. As Erica has stated, be intentional about how we leverage this opportunity and moment in time to help us as a nation to build back better Black-owned businesses and minority business enterprises nationally. With that, I want to thank you again, Congressman, and I'd like to turn it over to Ron Busby. Ron?
Thank you, Joanne. And I'll keep on the same topic of building back better. And I want for people to understand this is not a Black versus white conversation. This is not about us versus you. This is really about building back better, or as we say at the U.S. Black Chamber, building Black better. Over the last 5.5 years, we have heard a great deal about making America great again. And I say, Black people want America to be great as well. But in order for there to be a great America, there must be a great Black America. And in order for there to be a great Black America, we must have great Black businesses. And in order to have great Black businesses, we need great Black chambers. We need a great minority business development agency. We need great corporate partners. And most importantly, Reverends, we need great relationships with the Congressional Black Caucus. Over the last 50 years, you have held our voices. You've represented our concerns. And for that, we say thank you. But more importantly, we're going to challenge you to continue to do the work that is necessary for not just America, but particularly those Black-owned communities and businesses across the country that are looking for your leadership and to make sure that our voices are being heard at the highest levels and consistent conversations. So on behalf of the 145 chambers that we represent in the 385,000 Black-owned businesses, we say thank you. We continue to support you. And most importantly, we're going to challenge you and be your partner over the next 50 years. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate, and we look forward to continuing to work.
I'd like to thank all of you immensely as chair of this particular event. I'd like to thank Joyce Beatty as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and her leadership and what she has done and provided this opportunity. Again, I thank you all and thank you very much.